Earlier this week, we discussed our pathetic, impotent criminal justice system, which has utterly failed to maintain law and order in our communities. It's a justice system that seems to be uninterested in justice. And I proposed, as you recall, that we take off the kid gloves and start dealing harshly with criminals, predators, those who've turned our cities into reeking, zombified wastelands. In fact, I advocated that we adopt some of Singapore's strategies in this regard, strategies that have helped to make Singapore one of the safest and cleanest places in the world, while our cities look like massive drug-infested garbage dumps. Specifically, I believe that we, like Singapore, should adopt corporal punishment for thieves and robbers and vandals and the like. And, we used to use corporal punishment on kids in school. Now we've decided that it's too mean to even use on multiply convicted felons, and I find that attitude absurd and weak. The criminals also find our justice system absurd and weak, which is why they have no respect for it, and they have no fear of breaking its laws. And I also believe that we, like Singapore, and like Donald Trump has frequently suggested for this country, we ought to expand our capital punishment regime to include drug traffickers, those who distribute and sell mass amounts of poison, slowly killing thousands of people every year, ought to face the ultimate penalty. Nearly every murderer who has ever been executed in the United States inflicted less damage and killed fewer people than the most prolific drug traffickers. There's no reason why drug traffickers should get a more lenient sentence. Indeed, there's no reason why the death penalty should be reserved only for those who directly kill people. Sometimes the most heinous kinds of predators have other ways of preying upon their fellow human beings. Child rapists would be another example. With our ridiculous laws as they stand in most states, you can't execute a child rapist unless they're also guilty of murder, as if the crime of child rape itself doesn't warrant it. I mean, they deserve to die for their crimes, whether they directly kill their victims or not. This is the case I made, and I explain my logic, I think, in extensive detail. Still, it has proven to be, not surprisingly, controversial. People on both sides of the political divide are deeply scandalized by my argument. Twitter has been basically unusable for me over the past few days. Well, it's always basically unusable, but especially over the past few days because my entire feed is just people screaming at me for wanting to punish criminals. Now, look, it's okay if you disagree with me. I will give you permission until my theocratic fascist regime officially begins anyway. For now, you do have permission to disagree with me. You're wrong, but that's okay. You can be wrong. My problem is not that people simply disagree with my proposal, but that they treat the mere notion of harsher penalties for criminals as somehow absurd on its face. They recoil at the suggestion that those who traffic substances that kill thousands every year should be given the same punishment that we already give to other kinds of murderers. They scream out in horror at the very idea that perhaps we should sentence robbers and thieves to corporal punishment rather than letting them hang out in prison for a few months and then releasing them right back into the community with no additional penalties. This is the issue. You're not a stupid person for listening to my argument, finding it unpersuasive, and making a counter argument. That's fine. But you are, frankly, pretty damn stupid if my argument is so shocking to you that you can barely articulate a response, or if you think it's so unthinkably extreme that it isn't necessary to articulate a response. That kind of reaction to a perfectly reasonable suggestion, one with a massive amount of historical precedent, shows a lack of thought on your part and an inability to even entertain any challenge to modern orthodoxies, because that's really the problem, right? Is that what I'm saying flies in the face of our kind of generally accepted notions of how to deal with criminals. And for that reason alone, many people are upset by it. They can't explain really why. It just doesn't comport with what they've always been told and sort of the general atmosphere that they live in. Speaking of people who can barely articulate a response, that brings us to YouTuber Kyle Kulinski, who's the owner of the Secular Talk channel on YouTube. And like most YouTubers on the left, every so often Kyle likes to use my name to drive engagement. And every so often I will respond because, well, I can't help but take the bait. So yesterday, Kyle put out a video titled "Matt Walsh's Fascist Mask Slips on Twitter." And he's part of the mob, terribly upset about my comments, though he, like the rest of them, can't quite explain why. Now, most of Kyle's video consists of him calling me stupid and authoritarian while making incredulous facial expressions. Not really a counter argument, not much to respond to, but I did want to address one part of it, and it's this part. Listen.
Singapore is able to have nice things in part because they execute drug dealers by hanging and arrest even petty vandals and thieves and beat them with a cane until they bleed. We don't have nice things because we aren't willing to do what is required to maintain them. And then he goes on to say, there are some accusing me of advocating similar laws in this country, and I just want to clarify that yes, absolutely I want those laws in this country. Okay. Matt Walsh is an authoritarian. And it's hilarious because the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, and others like to go after the left and say, oh, the left are authoritarians and they hate freedom, bro. They hate liberty, bro. You hate freedom. You hate liberty. Part of freedom is being able to put in your body whatever you want to put in your body as long as you're not hurting anybody else. Being able to sell said substances. In the same way, I don't think we should be hauling away the CEO of Budweiser in handcuffs. I don't think you should haul away the weed dealer. He's saying, execute drug dealers. All right, dog. You want to start? Go find the CEO of Pfizer and Moderna. Go find the guys who make Xanax.
Okay, sounds good to me. I mean, we'd have to give the big pharma executives a fair trial, of course, convict them in a court of law. But once that's been done, I absolutely would want them to face the same penalty that should be imposed on any other drug trafficker. See, Kyle, you're not going to trip me up by demanding that I take my arguments to their logical conclusions, because I will always do that. I'm not afraid of doing that. That's the advantage to being logically consistent. Okay, so when you say, well, if that's how you feel, then that would lead to this. Sure, sounds good to me. Let's do that too. It's an advantage of being logically consistent that you yourself do not enjoy, because you have already made a number of statements that I'm quite sure you would not want to apply with total consistency. So you say that part of freedom is not only being able to put whatever you want into your body, but also being able to sell anything that someone else might want to put in their body. Now, here's the problem. This argument already assumes that freedom is itself the highest good, and therefore literally anything that falls under the banner of freedom is automatically good and should be permissible. But that's a case you need to make. Okay, you can't merely assume that. You haven't made it here, or as far as I know, anywhere else. See, I don't believe that freedom is the highest good. I don't think that the ideal society is one where people are simply able to do whatever they want all the time. I don't really think that you think that either, actually. I'm quite sure that there are things that you would say people should not be free to do. I'm quite sure of that. And yet your whole argument rests on simply labeling drug trafficking part of freedom. So already we have a number of logical inconsistencies and sort of half-baked ideas. Well, let's talk about drug traffickers for a moment. Now, you keep making this. You want to make this about weed, first of all. And I noticed that with all the people that are arguing with me. Talk about drug traffickers. All they want to do is talk about weed. They bring it right to weed. I didn't specifically say that. I said drug traffickers. Okay? And you do that because you know you'd sound ridiculous defending fentanyl dealers on the basis of freedom. Okay, so you go for the easiest form of the argument you can find. And you want to make this about marijuana. But I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. So let's focus on fentanyl dealers for a moment. They traffic and profit off of poison, just straight up poison, that destroys the lives of thousands of people and kills thousands more. And you say this is okay because the people who use it want to. They want to use it, so that makes it okay. Well, why does their desire to use the drug automatically make it okay to sell it? Is that the standard? Anything that somebody might want to use is automatically okay to sell? Is that really how you think the law should work? And again, your argument rests on an assumption that you haven't actually defended or explained, which is that freedom is the highest good. It's a good in and of itself, and anything that can be labeled freedom automatically should be allowed to happen. Besides, even if the fentanyl user has consented, the entire rest of the community, plagued by the filth and crime and violence the drug causes, have not consented. Okay, the dealer might consent, the user might consent, we'll get to that in a second, but the people forced to live in communities utterly ravaged by this poison do not consent to it. The people who are hopped up on these drugs and then they run to a subway platform and throw an old lady in front of the train. She didn't consent to that. She didn't consent to being part of this. She didn't consent to living in a city that's the Walking Dead with drug zombies walking around. Oh, and also, by the way, the user doesn't consent either. They're addicts. They're not making clear choices. They are acting out of desperation and compulsion and addiction. The dealers and traffickers exploit that for financial gain. There's no freedom here. Freedom has nothing to do with drug addiction. Who the hell could look at a heroin addict or a fentanyl addict or a crackhead and say, well, that's freedom? That is the opposite of freedom. So to review, freedom is not a self-explanatory defense of drug trafficking. It's also not a relevant defense because one of the things that makes drug trafficking so evil is that the end user does not actually have total freedom because they are enslaved by the drug. But let's take addiction out of it. Let's take drugs out of it. Okay? Let's make this even easier for you. You just said that people should be free to sell whatever anyone else wants to put in their bodies. That's what you said. Now, I think that this is an utterly ridiculous argument when it comes to hard drugs, but it's also ridiculous when it comes to things that are not drugs. That's how thoroughly ridiculous your argument is. So here's a thought experiment, just a thought experiment. Tide Pods. You may remember a few years ago when there was much consternation over the Tide Pod challenge, wherein idiots on TikTok or YouTube or whatever would eat the laundry detergent capsules and then get very sick, and in a few cases would die. Now, here's the question. What if the Tide detergent company decided that it wanted to lean into this phenomenon, and so it began selling its product as both a laundry detergent and a snack? What if they put on their packaging, Tide Pods, great for laundry, great for snacking? And what if they even, let's just say that they're being a little bit more responsible, they include an FDA warning that though it can physically be eaten, it might be damaging to your health. But still, even with that warning, they're marketing it. They are marketing it as a consumable product. Remember, you said that people should be free to put whatever they want into their bodies, and sellers should be free to sell whatever anyone wants to put into their bodies. Some people wanted to put Tide Pods in their bodies. Why couldn't the Tide company therefore sell Tide Pods specifically to that demographic, put it in the snack aisle next to the potato chips, explicitly for the purpose of consuming? Why couldn't they, in other words, intentionally poison their customers directly? What would be wrong with them sitting around in a marketing room and saying, you know what, some of our customers want to be poisoned and killed by this. Let's think of some ways to sell it to them. Let's think of some ways to market it. Not just market it to people who already want to consume Tide Pods, but let's try to convince people that they should eat this stuff and then sell it to them. The argument you made in defense of fentanyl dealers would cover this Tide company hypothetical absolutely. Now, maybe you escape this bind by plunging forward and saying, yeah, sure, Tide should be able to legally market their product to those who want to eat it. Now, that would make you consistent at least, but it would make you consistently insane, because you would be defending the freedom of corporations to intentionally and directly poison their customers, which would only go to show that freedom in and of itself is not a valid defense. And of course, you never did explain in that clip or in any other part of your diatribe what is so wrong with non-lethal physical punishments of criminals, especially when even simply putting someone in prison is a physical punishment involving physical coercion and force. Should we abolish prisons too while we're at it? And if we shouldn't abolish prisons, meaning that physical force can validly be used to punish criminals, then why should we automatically rule out corporal punishment, which is but one form of physical force? Well, we'll take it one step at a time, I suppose. Kyle still needs to figure out whether laundry detergent companies can sell their products as a snack. I don't want to overwhelm him with things, so we will let him think about that. But for the time being, we will also say that he is canceled. And that'll do it for this portion of the show. As we move over to the members block, hope to see you there. If not, talk to you on Monday. Godspeed.